Mid-range and aggro in an all-out scuffle, which decks gain footing in the tier list shuffle?
It only matters if it ladders. Comment below as we navigate through Week 5's metagame shifts. Now let's untap. So, Bant Control and Boros Convoke have fallen. Mono Red has risen, and Golgari Aggro is in a bit of a slump currently. Otherwise, we're not seeing a ton of shifts in the metagame this week compared to last. Max, what was the biggest surprise in your opinion this week?
I'll tell you, it was Azorius Soldiers roaring to the front of the line this week, and we're seeing widespread adoption of this as a tier 1 archetype. Now, while we knew it had the potential to compete for a while, must I add, I don't think any of us could have predicted this except perhaps Simon Nielsen, right?
So, less than 2 months ago, we had Dimir Aggro as the de facto best deck in the format. But Wilds of Eldraine has shifted that dynamic, and now at long last, we're seeing a consolidation of the metagame into about 3 tier 1 archetypes. We have Domain, Esper Midrange, and Azorius Soldiers holding top slots, and we're going to go ahead and talk through how each has evolved this past week to combat the others.
Now, while Golgari has taken some serious hits recently, I don't think anyone here is counting it out yet. Esper Legends continues to have variance woes, but if you run hot, this deck pays off. Just ask world champion Jean-Emmanuel Duprat. Then we got Mono Red. This archetype is firmly tier 2 in my experience. If the meta ignores it, we can see it smash through, but the moment the rest of the format focuses on it, it slinks back into obscurity. Classic tier 2 archetype sign.
And last but not least, we've got 4 brews to talk about in the Brewer's Corner. If you're watching and thinking you have something spicy to share with the world, comment below, and we'll take a look for next week's episode. Now let's get to the archetype breakdowns, starting with good old-fashioned Esper Midrange. Maybe? Oh god, there we go. Okay, so Ariane ran this build into the top 8 of the MTGO Challenge on Sunday with 2 other top 8s occurring the day before in this archetype. So what's changed this week? First, we see the absence of Fairy Mastermind here currently. While last week I believed we were going to see a surge of Up the Beanstalk engine-based mid-range control builds, Domain has instead shifted to a 2-2 split in the main board, and Control has yet to emerge, while Bant has fallen by the wayside. Thus, we see the return to a classic 4-4 push of Denic and Virtue of Loyalty to shore up the Azorius Soldiers matchup. And similarly, we note that the third cutdown is in over the second Lord Skitter for the main, and 2 Glistening Deluge is starting to pop up in these sideboards as well. All of these are acknowledgments that Soldiers isn't an easy win anymore, and we have to prepare with minor tweaks to numbers while not outright slanting to beat it yet. This is noting that there may come a day where Glistening Deluge goes into the main board if Azorius Soldiers continues to dominate.
That does make sense, and I have one follow-up question for you.
Sure.
I saw the 3 Kaitos, which is one more than what we saw in last week's featured list. What is that? Is that for the value matchup against other Esper decks, or perhaps other matchups as well?
I think Kaido is mostly a hedge against control and making sure that we have a decent engine there, because there are certain cards that are just going to be dead, like cut downs are going to be completely dead there, and you got to replace those in the main. So I think that's mostly just a hedge for control. But if you're on the play in the mirror match, I could also see an argument being made to run them. And if you are on the play against most mid-range archetypes, I can see an argument to run them there as well. On the draw, they lose quite a bit of efficacy if you're not playing against control. So I'm not sure I want them in for those specific instances.
Okay. All right. What do we have up next?
Good old-fashioned Azorius Soldiers. And the Soldiers vaulted into the deck to beat this week, taking home both MTGO Challenge trophies on back-to-back days while placing an additional 4 copies into their respective top 8s. So what's behind the meteoric rise? Well, yet again, Simon Nielsen has shifted the metagame of Standard on the back of a major tournament, the first time this year being Domain's top 8 Pro Tour build. And then this archetype has slowly evolved into a Tier 1 powerhouse. Now, this is Brasatore's trophy-winning build, and what you're going to note here is that there is no Yodian frontliners in the 1-drop slot anymore. The deck has shifted a little bit and pushed into Virtue of Loyalties as a 2-of, which, Max, I remember you and I talking a little bit about that. And the additional Protect the Negotiator main has now become more of a staple. This is really starting to feel more like blue-white Flash, if you note how many of these cards just hit on your opponent's turn, it's a lot of them now. There's very few sorcery speed spells left in this archetype. And I love that that's where we're at with this deck, because it's such a fun way to play.
Oh yeah, nothing like hitting a Resolute Reinforcements off of a Zephyr Sentinel. That's a good play. Uh, let me let me ask about this one card I've been seeing over and over again in these lists. We talked about Knight Errant of Eos and how that's not really a soldier, but there's good reason to have it in the list. Talk to us about Werefox Bodyguard. What should we know about it and its inclusion in most of these soldier iterations I'm seeing, and how is it really any different from Brutal Cathar?
Well, I think it's only loosely a soldiers deck right now. It's more so a blue-white tempo flash deck that happens to have a preponderance of soldiers, and so we're seeing that shift over to these Werefox bodyguards with the acknowledgement that being able to interact with your opponent at instant speed is far more critical than the creature type right now. And Werefox Bodyguard also gives it some incidental life gain against those mono red archetypes that just pop up from time to time. So I love it. I got ranched by it in Explorer of all places, because apparently Abzan Elves has come to prominence there, and they love playing that Elf Knight. But as you can see, in Soldiers, the ability to just pass with 3 mana up and have like 5 different options puts your opponent in this catch-22 position where they're like, I don't know if it's Make Disappear, Protect the Negotiators, Resolute Reinforcements, Virtue of Loyalty, or Werefox Bodyguard. That is a hell of a lot of interaction that you may possibly have that they have to account for in their decision trees. And I think it really increases the margins where they make a mistake.
Yeah. And I'm digging Protect the Negotiators as well. I've been a fan of that card for quite some time. But talk to us about the final list in Tier 1 that we have today. Domain.
Okay, gang. So last week I posted a 66 card main deck domain list and unleashed holy hell in the comment section. My bad. I'm going to take formal apology moment here. Here's a proper 60 card iteration. I double fucking checked just for you, but none other than the infamous Jabberwocky. Now, Jabberwocky went back-to-back second place finishes this weekend with their domain list, with Edel playing a similar build and getting a top 4 finish as well on Sunday. The first thing I want to note in Jabberwocky's build is the main deck's 6 Wrath effects. Now, normally we see 3 to 4 Sunfalls riding alone in the main and maybe a Depopulate in the sideboard or 2. There are 6 Wraths in the main. This is a nod to the rise of Azorius Soldiers' go-wide strategy in the meta, while also paying some dividends against these Esper Legends builds and aggressive starts from Golgari Midrange and Esper Midrange. Now, the list here is the Sunday list, and it shifted from Saturday to Sunday, first positing 2 Lorn of the third path in the sideboard before shifting those slots over to 2 Ferals as well, upping it to 8 total Wrath effects. We also see a slight shift from the third Virtue of Persistence over to the second Go for the Throat in the main board, and the loss of a few Invasion of Zendikars to make room for those to populate. And what I love about this build is that it plays a lot closer to the classic 5-color control with a large end game rather than that dedicated ramp that we've seen in the past from Nielsen's old build.
Okay. All right, I see. So talk to us about some of these shifts, why the shift to 2 Farewells, the full playset of Up the Beanstalks. Is there a downside to shifting so heavily in favor of board wipes?
Yeah, there definitely is. The problem with pushing this hard into board wipes is that if the metagame alters towards control, you are going to have so many dead cards game 1. It's like, this is a build that if you play against Esper control, you're pretty close to just scooping up game 1 and handing it to them, because you have so few ways to deal with what they're doing or interact with decks that don't rely on creatures. So you are hedging hard and saying, we have to win the Azorius Soldier matchup. We have to beat these creature-based decks. And that's really what Jabberwocky aimed for. And I like it when we see those slants. I really do. Because it's uncommon to see one of the higher level players, and Jabberwocky absolutely is. He is a staple in this game. And seeing that slant means that he read the meta very well.
Okay. All right. That does make a lot of sense right now for that shift. All right. Let's slide down into Tier 2. And I'm going to kick things off with Golgari Aggro. All right, so last week we introduced a Golgari Aggro that held some slots for what I would say now are less than optimal pieces when you consider the the present meta. This week's list, brought to us by Edel, that placed 6th in MTGO Challenge, seems a little bit more thought out, more precise in its responsiveness to the meta. Some highlights here that I'll highlight: 2 copies of Duress in the main board. They acknowledge the power of control and mid-range archetypes and how they're currently countering aggro strategies and using board wipes to mop those strategies up. Now, in lieu of Arcfiend, we're seeing Tortoise instead. Now, while the Tortoise doesn't necessarily pack as much of a punch, it does have a very nice ETB for ramping into Nissa, and also presents a way for Restless Cottage to break through for even more power. Lord Skitter is a welcome addition as well, bringing the necessary graveyard hate, I would say, and creating a board state that gets worse and worse for the opponent as the match wears on. Finally, the sideboard contains some clear targeting toward the necessary archetypes. You have Frillback, which you don't often see. Seems like a great idea. It does allow you to mitigate graveyard usage. It does mitigate artifacts and enchantments, and the occasional mono red deck. It gets you some life gain. So I stand by these choices.
Fair. Now, when we talk about Turtle versus Archfiend of the Dross, a week ago, I was in love with the Archfiend, saying, fantastic, we need a faster clock. This is a faster clock. Let's go this route. But now we're back to the Turtle. What changed and why?
I don't know that I have the macro reason. I do know one interaction that makes Arcfiend of the Dross not super great in this meta, and there's a widespread usage of Glissa, and Glissa's ability to take away those counters can make Archfiend of the Dross like an insta loss for the opponent when it's out on the field at the same time. So you don't want that scenario. I imagine that scenario might have happened to somebody.
Yeah. So, Path of Peril versus Glistening Deluge. This is going to be a common question when looking at Esper, when looking at Golgari. Anything running black-based removal is going to have to make that decision. Why do you think Path of Peril was pushed for this?
Looking at Glistening Deluge and what it hits, right, it has that bonus towards the specific color types, but I was thinking about mono red when you have to cover a wide share of the meta, and I see mono red creeping up. I think Peril's a good choice here, just because it can still hit a Monstery Swift Spear boosted up by something like a Monstrous Rage. It still hits those creatures, and a lot of the creatures in mono red are 2 or less mana value, so I think it hits that pretty well. I don't know, that might be one a good enough reason, I think, for one of those over the other.
And I'll just say on a personal note, for Path, it doesn't hit Glissa. Glistening Deluge does, which is a little awkward for Glistening Deluge.
Yeah, okay. You're gonna have to make these calculations yourself, player, when you're looking at the meta for an event, because that's a good point.
Alrighty, moving right along, we've got Esper Legends back in Tier 2. Max, take it away.
Nothing beats a classic, am I right? Esper Legends, God, it's been hanging around for a while. This list continues to perform, though, and perform pretty well, even alongside the mid-range brother to the list. This list focuses more on curving out to provide raw strength and card advantage. However, 3 copies of Fairy Mastermind here in the deck seem to indicate that they want to mitigate the advantages of Bant, and maybe that's happened quite a few times in the past week because we don't see Bant on the tier list anymore. But Domain as well, these up the beanstalk base decks, and any other decks looking to loot off that card. I want to note also that Thalia is present. This is a way to assure that the opponent pays for having removal. At least they have to wait a turn to use it. All these things get shifted a turn in those decks. And then, of course, we have 2 copies of Urtai there to make sure that once you've established a board state, that you have some way to stand against the board wipe that inevitably comes nowadays. Speaking of a Domain deck with 6 board wipes, my God.
Right. So, in this build, we saw yet again Adeline, and the question of Adeline versus Lord Skitter continues to be a primary point of contention in these lists, as they haven't really evolved much in the past 2 weeks other than this decision. So what are your thoughts on which one do you play and why?
So I do have a single thought on this, and that's perhaps the graveyard hate that's provided by Lord Skitter is enough to warrant its inclusion over Adeline. I actually personally prefer Lord Skitter for one other reason as well, and this isn't something that counts for a lot that most players might overlook, actually, but the double white mana on Adeline versus the double black mana that you're going to have to get with Sheldred eventually on the next turn, I think it's a small point, but having the right mana base counts for a lot, and having the math to have that double white might be a little tougher. So I don't know. It's a small point, but sometimes these tight margins require, these small observations.
That makes sense. I think we've all had that experience, or have experienced that frustrating moment where you cast Adeline on 3 and you can't cast Shelly on 4 and you just want to break something. So, without further ado, the deck that's great at breaking stuff, Mono Red. Here we go.
All right, red isn't going anywhere, especially this week, as Lakos took this little beauty to a 4th place finish in the most recent MTGO challenge. Many of the same pieces you've been seeing are still here, with a notable absence of Monstrous Rage to go along with the Swift Spear. I suspected keeping a high creature count became the priority in light of how much removal has been really gracing the decks and sideboards over the past week. Scoundrel, Kumano, and Squee help Godric, fly and take off. Having that damage output on turn 3 is still a sought-after outcome, apparently. And while this deck main board tops out at 3, the sideboard includes some 4-mana pieces that try to turn the deck into big red strategy, including Koth, Jaya, 2 copies of Raiju. Whether that's a more effective strategy than the usual suite of removal spells that you'll see in the sideboard remains to be seen, however.
Fair. Now, when I look at this list, what I'm noting is that Invasion of Tarkir not present. Is it actually worthwhile to play?
That's a really good question, because I was singing its praises last week. Invasion of Tarkir really does feel like its own win con when you apply it with Shivan Devastator. You have some other dragons in there, perhaps. I'm not sure, though, that it fits with this kind of game plan, this fast, low-the-ground aggro, high-damage game plan, as, what you'll need to invest in it. So, yeah, I don't know. Most of the damage that you could go towards flipping Tarkir, really, you want to go to face in a lot of scenarios.
Fair. Now, also there was a Witchstalker and Nahiri Warcrafter in the same list. We're seeing that 2-1 split. Is there a reason for that split in your opinion, or are we just doing it to do it because we can't figure out which one we want?
Right, you would think in a higher creature, lower to the ground aggro list like this, Witchstalker might take precedence because you can potentially make that a really cheap card. But then there's also the ability on Nahiri's Warcrafting to be able to pull more cards out of exile and play them. So I don't know. I guess you have to balance those scenarios. Splitting the difference like you see here seems like hedging bets on those scenarios, when this deck would more likely, honestly, benefit from the Frenzy because of the high creature count.
That makes sense. Alrighty, and now we are on to our favorite segment here, or at least my favorite segment, Brewer's Corner. Let's pop off with a little Sultai Mill. Credit going to Noble Murloc for some help in designing this one. We talked about Golgari Mill, Welcome to the Third Color, and what happens when we get it. I'm still testing out whether Snooping Newsy is actually a real card, but the thought was intriguing that we could get kind of our own mini Denic going in a deck like this, because you do have 5 mana values. You got 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can, in fact, get there. And so you have this ability to get to Denic, but on impact, it's at least going to mill 2 cards. Likewise, we did the Ludovic as one of, and the old Rutstein as one of, because they loot on impact, and they continue to accrue value as long as they stick around. But people don't want to waste removal spells, maybe forced to waste removal spells. That's kind of where you want to be, where you put these people in this catch-22 of like, kill it or I get value, and if you kill it, now you don't have removal for the goyfs that are coming that you've just made bigger. And that's kind of the point of this deck. It also went a little farther up the chain and played some Skyfisher Spiders to say, okay, we need to be able to kill Shelly, we need to be able to gain some life. That's really where we're at with this list at the moment. It needs some more work.
How do you feel about Skyfisher Spider, though? Every time I see that card in a list, I'm always intrigued.
I love it. It makes some things just really... It turns a bunch of mediocre cards that are there to just kind of churn your engine into value. Where all of a sudden you're able to take things like Gnawing Vermin and not feel so shitty about playing that one drop that's kind of dead in a lot of scenarios, because by turn 4, it's a removal piece for Shelly now. We don't care. We're fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Alrighty.
All right. Let's talk about
Rakdos.
Rakdos. Let's go. So credit to Noble Murloc here as well, right?
Oh yeah, man's been
All
brewing.
Right, awesome. I love this because this is closer to my heart. I love Grixis Dragons. This is 4-color dragons if you count green as well, and I do. Ravaz of the Claw and Virtue of Persistence and Cruelty of Gix all make this deck seem like the kind of deck that you could reanimate some big dragons with. and that seems like a cool thing to do. In addition, Hitotsugu and Kairi make that easier by allowing you to cast those big spells to be able to do that. You got Capricious. Is Capricious Hellkite in here? No, 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 no. No, those are Decadent Dragons. Decadent Dragon, that's the new addition from Wilds of Eldraine. Now, this is my favorite adventure card in the whole set. Right, the 3-drop side, you get to steal your opponent's cards, and when you're playing with a wide mana base like this, you actually get to play the majority of things that you're going to end up stealing. And then the 4-color, the 4-cost expensive taste, the Decadent Dragon on the flip side allows you to really just play what you need to get those treasure tokens and get your high-end stuff out there. So I'm intrigued. There's a lot of tools in here to make the top end happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Alrighty, moving on, we have Esper Super Friends. So I'm just going to put this out there. I know this was user submitted. I, honest to God, couldn't figure out who submitted it. I went through all the comment sections I could today, and I could not figure out. So will the real Esper Super Friend please stand up and just comment below and let me know it was you, because I'd love to give you credit. I'm sorry. I tried. It happens. Anyway, this is a spicy list. What I love about this is that it's using that Ashiok passive ability in conjunction with Staff of Compilation to just kind of have some fun. You know, like pay 4 life, you mean take 4 cards off the top and draw another one? Like you're just able to do so much so quickly with this deck. And this Urza assembles the Titans. This really is a Super Friends build. Between the Vraska, Ashiok, and Teferis, you're just going value, 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 wipe the board, value, 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 value. And that's what a Super Friends deck wants to do. I'm not sure as to whether or not we can afford to have 4 Demonic Bargain in this, and I'm not really sure we can afford 4 Staff of Completion. These are both kind of slots that I would think are variable, but the rest of the list feels very strong.
Yeah, it seems like one that you would want to tinker with and play it while you can, because Super Friends decks and standards are going to eventually go out of style.
Right? Alrighty, we got our last one of the evening, Chaotic Rex. Max, show us what we got.
Let's go. All right. So this deck is all about Chaotic Transformation, getting the fuel you need for that card to turn those tokens into the Big Rex, City on Fire. Oh my god, who gets to play with that card? And Portal to Phyrexia, already a powerhouse all on its own. So on the way to that, you know, you've got some helpers in Big Score and Invasion of Zendikar. Big Score in particular, you can use those tokens. Return from the Wilds, high value card that allows you to also, you know, produce more tokens. And then let's not forget Rouse Reinforcements, very efficient way. A very, very cheap card to get those tokens out there with. And then if you're, you know, on the way to that, you can also aggro your opponent with the 3 copies of Monstrous Rage and the Witch's Mark as well, just creating a little bit more damage output from the base of the deck. So I like the idea. I dig this deck. It kind of reminds me of, you know, like creativity in Pioneer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And credit goes to Matt961 for sending us that list. Thank you, Matt. Love the list. Love the brew. The fact that you managed to integrate rolls, artifacts, and creature tokens into this Chaotic Transformation deck is just brilliant. I love it. I'm not saying it's tier 1. I doubt it is, but it is really fucking cool. So that brings us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we looked at 10 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 6 of Wilds of Eldraine Standard?
As we round another corner, right, towards the release of Ixalan and a possible ban announcement that I hear through the grapevine might be coming after next Monday, we should caution viewers that things will not remain as they are in the tiers this week. At least that's my prediction. Change is coming. It becomes a matter of how brewers will react to that change. Perhaps more importantly, though, in the short term, how they will anticipate these changes and the changes they make in that anticipation. Ixalan has historically been a very aggressive plane, tough creatures, solid archetypes, vampires, dinosaurs, right? Will this mean an even more aggressive creature-heavy meta when we finally get there? And for now, things seem to be in mid-range heaven, in my opinion. Maybe not in the way they were a year ago, but still mid-range heaven. There are enough pieces to offset aggro, enough pieces to help get around removal. We're basically seeing a Mexican standoff situation between aggro and mid-range archetypes. I believe this is most evidenced by the split between Esper Legends and Esper Midrange and how those are both still viable decks. How things will shake out before the release of Ixalan over the next month is anyone's guess. Regardless, We'll be here to walk you through all the changes. So don't forget to like, subscribe, share our channel with everyone you play Magic with. And in the meantime, Dark, is there anything you're anticipating this weekend?
So we covered that Domain has pushed lower to the ground in an effort to combat the rise of Azorius Soldiers and Flash Tempo-based decks. Whether additional slots will be carved out or a shift to full control will take place still remains to be seen, but we know that Soldiers is a tough nut to crack in its current iteration, and I think we'll see 3 casting cost sweepers uptick in the sideboards of black-based archetypes, although it'll be context dependent on whether it's going to be Path of Peril or Glistening Deluge, as we discussed a little bit earlier. Now, Esper Midrange is probably going to need to adopt 2 Gix's commands and 2 Path/Deluges to help swing the matchup back in its favor, but it can certainly adapt and even skew the deck to facilitate this, as we've seen it do time and time again so far. Now, this past weekend, to me, it really showed us that Domain, Esper Midrange, and Azorius Soldiers are the big 3 at the top, holding dominant metagame shares as they keep out traditional aggro and control archetypes efficiently. So will anyone crack the code and find a path through? Tune in next week, because there is a Pizza Box tourney that marks a final tune-up before their annual Jankathon, and we know the competition will be fierce for this final qualifier. So until next time,
Oh, yeah.
untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.